Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. The CMC connects people and ideas through community conversations at forums just like this one every week. I'm Tony Bell, President and CEO of Phoenix Consulting Company, and I'm also proud to serve on CMC's Board of Trustees. For those of you joining us by live stream, we're coming to you from the Ellis here in Columbus's historic Victorian Village, so welcome everyone. If you scan the QR code at your tables, you can learn more about today's forum. And you can also take a short survey, which we'd really appreciate you doing, and see the many organizations that support our CMC. Thank you so much. So, speaking of supporters, we want to let you know that we are so incredibly grateful for today's forum sponsors, the Robert Weiler Company and Thanks Be to God Foundation. Thank you. Let's give them a round of applause. We would also like to thank today's forum partners, Families Flourish, the Ellis, and the presenting sponsor of our live stream, the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation. Lastly, we'd like to thank you to our live stream partners, the Columbus Dispatch. Every CMC forum takes a village, and I want to thank you for being our village and supporting today's program, and I hope that our village feeds back into you because this village is reciprocal. So welcome to today's forum. The title is Housing, Health, and Hope, all things that we need. Opening the gates to the opportunity right here in Central Ohio. What would Central Ohio's future look like with safe, affordable, mixed income neighborhoods as part of everyday life? Well, another question, how much healthier, stronger, and equitable would we be in our region with such things? Today, we examine the links connecting housing, health, and opportunity, also known as hope. We will also spotlight the will to act that could open the gates to healthier outcomes for all. Could that be the missing part? So please welcome today's incredibly distinguished panelists, Dr. Craig Pollack, the Katey Ayers Endowed Professor at the Johns Hopkins School of Nursing at the John Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. I'm so excited that I'm stumbling over my words for this amazing panel. Merisa Bowers, Council President and Member at Large with Gahanna City Council. You can clap for each of these people. And our forever mayor, Michael B. Coleman, partner with ICE. I'm sorry, it doesn't say that in the script. Let me go back. He's now a partner with Ice Miller, and of course, he's our fourth-term and longest-serving mayor, but he's one of our favorites. I think I'm not allowed to say favorite because we have a current mayor whom we love very much, but you know, it's okay to laugh. Thank you. We also have Kenneth Wright, Mayor and Council Member at Large for the City of Westerville. I let him know that that's where my favorite pool, my favorite swimming pool is for the summer. So thank you, Westerville. And to our host, Darci Congrove, Managing Director with GBQ. Okay, so today's lunch conversation, I invite our very special guest from Baltimore, or for some people known as B-more or Baltimore in Maryland, National Health and Housing expert, Dr. Craig Pollack, to the podium to set the stage for our conversation. So, Dr. Pollack, the podium is yours.
So thank you so much for having me for this important discussion. I'm going to be talking about what we know about the connections between housing and health, and I'm going to go through the 4 pillars of housing and health. Those are housing affordability, stability, housing quality, and neighborhood context. And in thinking about how to do this, I came to mind a patient that I saw in my primary care clinic just a couple weeks ago. And Missy is a longtime primary care patient of mine, woman in her 40s, and rather than coming into the office like she was planning to do, it was scheduled and turned into a video visit. And so there she was in the car, asked her to pull over to the side of the road so we could talk. And I asked, well, what's going on, Missy? Why aren't you in clinic today? And she explained to me that she had to move, that her house had black mold in it, and she didn't feel like it was safe for her anymore. She had looked for a new place to live, but she couldn't find a place that was affordable. So instead, she moved in with her mom, someone who she had kind of a difficult relationship with over the years. But she told me it was better than being homeless. The irony of the situation was not lost on her. Missy worked at a local housing authority where she was on the wait list for a housing voucher, but hadn't yet received it. And so I think Miss C's story is something that is kind of an extreme example of something that I see in my primary care clinic and something that we know about our family members and our neighbors and our loved ones around the difficulties in having and finding a stable, affordable place to live right now. So let me go through a little bit about each of those 4 pillars, thinking about Miss C's story, and then kind of have a discussion about it. So the first pillar that we think about with kind of the connection between housing and health is the role of housing affordability. And we all know that we're in a housing affordability crisis right now. 42 million Americans are paying more than 30% of their incomes on rent and utilities, living in unaffordable housing. 50% of renters are living in unaffordable housing. And when that happens, people make trade-offs that's harmful to their health. There's trade-offs in terms of whether they're going to buy food or pay for their rent, whether they can pay for their health care or pay for the rent. And what we see is that as people pay more for the rent, they have less money left over after the rent eats to afford their health care, to afford their food. And it's not that they have less need for health care or less need for food, it's just that there's not enough money at the end of the month. We also know, as the story illustrated, that about 1 in 4 households that are eligible for housing assistance end up receiving it. Housing assistance, is, in contrast to a lot of our entitlement programs, is not an entitlement. So not everyone that's eligible for housing assistance is able to receive it. The wait list in Baltimore is currently incredibly long and closed to new applicants. Which leads us to our next kind of pillar, which is around housing instability. Frequent moves, we know, disrupts people's lives in really important ways. I didn't mention that Miss C also had diabetes, true story, and she had lost her glucometer, her ability to check her blood sugars when she was moving. And so she didn't know what her sugar was doing. She didn't know whether she was taking the right amount of meds. And that's one example that we see all the time of people when they're forced to move, they're disrupted in their lives, they're disrupted in their health care, they're disrupted in their social networks. And this is really an enormous problem. We know that about 6% of renters face eviction notices every year, or about 2.7 million households. So the trouble is enormous. The third pillar that I often think about is around quality of housing. And this is around, for example, lead paint. Something that we often think about when we think about housing is the quality of it. And we know that lead paint, for example, leads to neurodevelopment problems in children. We know about asthma triggers. We know that there's so many things in people's environments that can be damaging to health, and having a safe place to live really needs to incorporate those factors. The last place that I want to spend a little bit more time on is around the neighborhood context. And this is a place where we've done a lot of research with my team at Hopkins, looking at these housing mobility programs. So housing mobility programs stem out of fair housing lawsuits in Chicago, Baltimore, other places, that said that a lot of different organizations, including public housing authorities, were violating fair housing laws in segregating families in poor, underserved neighborhoods. And as part of the remedy for that, they've created programs that have helped families move to quote-unquote opportunity neighborhoods, meaning they have more resources. I also want to say at the outset, and I think it's an important framing for this conversation, when we're talking about mobility and giving people access to different neighborhoods, we shouldn't be talking about this in an either-or framework. We're often talking about you're helping families move or you're investing in places. And I think that kind of zero-sum framing is really dangerous for this conversation. And I think we need to think of it as a both-and. And in the setting of mobility, it's really an important policy tool that's getting a lot of attention, which I think is appropriate. And it's also a really important way to try to understand about the neighborhood context in ways that leads to stronger evidence and stronger understanding. And there have been a number of studies on this, which I won't have time to go into now, including the landmark Moving to Opportunity, which was very cool in that it was randomized, so it was able to separate the many constraints that people have about where they live, and studied the long-term benefits of mobility. And what they found with this is that, and Raj Chetty and colleagues found that kids who had the chance to move at a young age tended to have higher earnings as adults. Some of the work that we've done showed that over 21 years of follow-up, kids that had the chance to move, especially those at a younger age, had a lower risk of hospitalization over time, leading to less hospital spending, and especially reductions in mental health-related hospitalizations and asthma. In part, building on those findings, we did a study in Baltimore with their Baltimore Regional Housing Partnership, which is a housing mobility program there, where we followed kids with asthma. And we looked at them before they moved and followed them after they moved, doing really careful home assessments. What we found was striking. For kids with asthma, their rates of asthma attacks were reduced by about 50% after they moved. This is like online with a lot of the medicines that we use to treat asthma. And when we went and looked at it, we thought this is going to be a story of mouse and cockroach allergens, that we know that mouse and cockroach allergens are the triggers for a lot of asthma exacerbations in Baltimore City. And by moving, they were going to reduce those, and that's what's going to change the asthma exacerbations and the asthma symptoms that kids experience. That's not what we found. Those things matter, but the thing that really mattered in our study was related to urban stress. That families, as they moved, experienced much less urban stress, and that was a key factor in their children experiencing less asthma exacerbations. And I think underlying each of those 4 factors that I talked about, housing affordability, stability, quality, and neighborhood context, is the important role of stress and the important choices that families get to make about where they live in safe and hopeful environments. So with that, I thank you for your time.
Hello, everyone. I'm Darci Congrove, and I have the privilege of being the moderator of today's forum. First, I want to thank Dr. Pollack for making the trip, and also for sharing a personal story about a real person who has lived through some of these issues that we're going to talk about today. I think that humanizes it for all of us. I get the privilege now of opening up our conversation with our panel to talk about opening the gates that prevent many of our residents in Central Ohio from having choices about where to live. And we're going to start with Mayor Coleman. You have frequently talked about the gates that keep people in and the gates that keep people out in our community. Can you elaborate on that? And then we'll have our other panelists join in on this question as well.
Testing. All right, great. First, let me just say I'm honored to be here. Thank you very much, and see all these wonderful people out here, these great panelists as well. Know a whole lot more about this stuff than I do. I'm just speaking from a point of view of community leadership, living through it and experience. 44 years living in the city of Columbus, of which over half of that I was in public office, of which over half of that I was the mayor of the city, and met many challenges over these years. And I'm really looking at this question more in the rear view mirror as to how our community, our region, developed over time. And over time, and I might say as long as 75, 100 years, the Columbus region was developed into 2 communities. The gated communities, they're both gated communities. The gated community that kept people out, and then there's the gated community that kept people in. Our government policies were built around those 2 concepts. First, let me talk about the gated communities that keep people in. The gated communities that keep people in are those communities where people of lower economic means live, where black folks, brown folks live, where issues of safety and occur, where not great housing exists, occur. And in those gated communities, the policy of government is let's go in and change those communities. And that's a good thing. The good thing is that government, including me, had the philosophy of going into those gated communities and trying to change them for the better. That philosophy needs to continue. I support it 100%. But here's what happens. It takes decades to transform a neighborhood. And in the meantime, people fall between the cracks. The great intention of changing neighborhoods needs to continue with fervor and focus. But what happens is there is an unsaid thing that you're stuck in this gated community and you can't come out. Because there's other gated communities, and those are the gated communities that keep people out. And those are just the opposite of the gated communities that keep people in. Usually a predominant race that isn't brown or black, wealthier individuals, higher income, better housing, better schools as well. Oh, what a coincidence. And lo and behold, the people in the gated communities that keep people in can't go into the gated communities that keep people out because they're gated on both sides. And so part of the challenge is always going to be, how do you not just open up the gated communities, how do you rip down the gates permanently to ensure that those who live in the gated communities can live in the other gated communities that keep people out. And so, historically, it seems to me government has worked in silos. We look at housing, but we don't look at healthcare and housing. We look at housing, but don't understand the connection between housing and education. And we don't think about education, we think about housing alone. And those mobility programs like Families Flourish, where they look at everything combined, the wraparound services associated with good housing, subsidized, with coaching and educational opportunities and job opportunities, healthcare opportunities. You wrap those all around that same family. They do well. The results are there. So that's what I mean by gated communities, and I have a whole lot more to say.
Let's talk about Mayor Coleman's dichotomy, though, of the in and the out. And our perception, I think, is that life is different than that in the suburbs. And maybe Councilwoman Bowers, we'll start with you. Talk a little bit about Gahanna and how this issue lands in Gahanna.
Sure. Well, thank you also, and thank you so much for having me here today. I was sharing with a dear friend and coworker that I had been invited to serve on a panel about health and housing, and he paused and he looked at me and he said, "Are you qualified for that?" And I said, "No, of course not." But the reality is that we all must become qualified on this subject because, to Mayor Coleman's point, this is a holistic issue. We have to, as community leaders, as decision makers, and as activists in the community, we have to be able to recognize the connection between what a healthy, holistic community looks like and how housing fits into that. In Gahanna, we have a little bit of a unique situation. Gahanna has sort of been under the radar for many, many years, and we have developed organically and sort of by happenstance over the last predominantly 30 years when our population really grew. Gahanna is a community now of 36,000 with about 12.7 square miles. Most of our community is developed at this point in time, and we are adjacent bounded by mostly Columbus. So what we see in terms of how we continue to provide housing access to our residents is maintaining the natural affordability that we've enjoyed, maintaining the access and the openness where we have a strong population, where diversity numbers are reflected in our population in a better way, frankly, than some other suburbs. And so continuing to protect that, continuing to protect that access, that quality of life, and that path forward. Some of the things that we're working on beyond the ability to potentially add housing where we can is to make sure that the quality of life, to Dr. Pollack's final point about neighborhood stability and neighborhood services, making sure that our community remains really healthy. And what we mean by that is protecting our tree canopy, because we know that there's a direct relation to health and the preservation and presence of a tree canopy in a community. Working on making sure that our community has active transportation, including multi-purpose paths and sidewalks, and ensuring that those sidewalks and that pedestrian infrastructure is as safe as possible for all of our community members. And in addition, building our relationship and maintaining our relationship with our school district, because we recognize in Gahanna this connection between the strength of our district and the strength of our city. So in those areas, those are some of the ways that we're highlighting these issues.
Thank you. Mayor Wright?
Okay. First, thank you for the opportunity to be here among this distinguished panel. Let me start by saying I am a transplant to Ohio. My family and I moved here from Washington, D.C. in 2005. So just over 19 years, we've been a part of Central Ohio. We did not know the first thing about Westerville when we moved there. All we knew is that it had a great school system, and it had the house that my wife and I wanted. She wanted a nice outside deck, and I wanted a master bedroom away from the children. Now, when we moved to Westerville, we drove 7 hours, 2 cars, well, 1 car and a U-Haul with my wife and me, 3 children, and 2 cats. It was about a 7-hour drive, give or take, and when we pulled up to our house, the streets were lined with cars. In our driveway, there were cars. And I'm thinking to myself, what's going on? We moved in June, the first part of June, and that was the height of graduation season and graduation parties. And our neighbors were having a graduation party, and our house had been vacant for so long that it was being used for parking, parties, whatever. So we pull up, I'm tired, I'm mad, okay? My wife, ever the extrovert, wants to go out and find out what's going on. And she finds out where the party is being held, and she goes and meets the neighbors. They're very apologetic, and the neighbors were wonderful, wonderful. They opened up their arms and welcomed us. They brought us food. They allowed us to use their vehicles while we transitioned. I'm like, where did we move? Because that was foreign to me. But there was this welcoming spirit right there in that cul-de-sac. And I thought, hey, we did good. We moved to a great place. Now, leaving that cul-de-sac, something different. You know, Westerville wasn't that welcoming, you know, for the most part. And it wasn't until several years later that I decided to get involved with Westerville. And in so learning, I found out that Westerville has grown in size and scope and becoming a more welcoming and inclusive community over the years. Westerville, in my opinion, is the gem of Central Ohio. We are 12 square miles northeast of Columbus. We have more than 650 acres of parkland. We've got 51 miles of trails, and about 95% of all of our residents live within a half mile of a developed park. We have a thriving business community, and we have an historic uptown. Now, with all of that, that's very attractive for people wanting to come to Westerville wanting to live in Westerville. But it's also one of the reasons why there's some NIMBYism, you know, that all of these great things about Westerville we want to keep to ourselves, you know. So it's been a hurdle to bring in more housing, more population to Westerville. But to the city's credit, we know that population is coming. We know that we need housing. So the city has been very thoughtful and very intentional in its development strategies. I've been on council, this is my second term, and I really started to dive into what the councils before me were into. And it started with a community plan that laid out how the city envisioned its thoughtful growth and development over the years. And then shortly after that, we did an attainable housing study as to what the residents thought attainable housing, affordable housing should look like. So using that as the benchmark, Westerville has done several things over the past 5 years. We've added just under 900 dwelling units, a combination of multifamily and single family. We've added source of income protection. We've added a density bonus in areas where there's access to public transportation, high traffic areas, and we've also done ordinances for ADUs. Now, we realize that building new development is going to be tricky because we are landlocked and a lot of the development has happened, but we're looking into that. But in the meantime, we have done ordinance on accessory dwelling units. We're looking to keep our residents in their homes because a lot of times our residents are struggling, you know, to handle various costs. So we want to make sure that our residents can stay in their homes. And one thing we did recently is we partnered with MORPC to create one of the first of its kind pilot housing programs in which residents who are at 100% or less of the Columbus AMI have the opportunity to have a $25,000 grant, a $25,000 grant for home improvements, for home repairs, your roof, your HVAC. In these times where costs are astronomical, every little bit helps. And that's one way that Westerville is helping its residents. We're trying to keep them in their homes as something we can do right now. And then we're going to tackle how we build additional housing units for the anticipated population that we see coming in. So to answer the question, I went all the way around. We are working to help address the region's housing situation, but we're doing it thoughtfully, strategically, and methodically.
Thank you. I think that takes us to the question of zoning and the impact that zoning has. And as you all know, because you're informed CMC attendees, the City of Columbus has just passed pretty significant zoning legislation changes. And that includes an emphasis on what we're calling corridors that are open for public transit that could handle more density. And Mayor Coleman, I'd like to hear your perspective on whether you think this is going to be the right step to get us moving in the direction that we think we need to go in the city.
I do. I think it was a visionary thing for the city to promote and to get through this new zoning package. I see we have a former member of council here, Elizabeth Brown. Thank you for that. And others who were involved in that. But let me also say that these kinds of activities of making housing denser, more important, cheaper, not cheap, but more affordable, is a responsibility of not just the city of Columbus. It is a regional responsibility. And like in Gahanna, like in Westerville, you got two visionary leaders here. the issue of housing, education, and health, those three things, is a regional question. And you can't talk about one without talking about the other. And in the city of Columbus, when it comes to education, I am gravely concerned about what I'm seeing today with our public education system. I'm a strong supporter of our CCS and what it does, but I also believe it needs intervention today. It needs intervention. The business community has turned its back to our public school system. I'm troubled by it, very troubled by it. And our civic community is just now starting to stand up. I saw some preachers come out the past couple days, read in the Columbus Dispatch. I commend them for stepping up, saying, you got to see a change. And our political leadership needs to come together as well. Our system in Columbus Public Schools needs intervention. But when you intervene in that, you're also helping housing. And you're also helping healthcare. All these things, as my colleague here says together, they have to be looked at holistically. And unfortunately, we've developed a bunch of silos in this community, a bunch of gated communities in this region, and we need to tear down the silos, tear down the gates, and begin to address these things holistically. With everybody at the table, no backs turned.
I want to go back to Mayor Wright. Talk a little bit about, you talked about a number of things you're doing to increase housing units. How does that balance against gentrification and perhaps pushing some people out? How are you finding that welcoming and bringing more people in without creating a place that some people just can't stay any longer?
That is a good question. How do we bring people in and
keep the others there, right? As inevitably, I think, as development happens, we presume that the cost goes up, right? And that perhaps then makes living in Westerville unattainable for others. How do we balance that?
So as I mentioned, we're tackling what we can address right now, the low-hanging fruit, if you will, and that is keeping our residents in their homes. During the pandemic, Westerville initiated a utility holiday where 1 month we forgave electrical billing for our residents and our businesses because we knew that during the pandemic, people were out of work, times were tough, and we wanted to do our part. During that time, Westerville created a program called Westerville Helps. And that is a program that allows residents to get financial assistance for utilities, for minor home repairs up to $5,000 will be reimbursed by the city, and also for parks and recreation, because to the point of health and wellness, we want people to be able to enjoy our parks, but sometimes people could not afford that, or they had to make a choice between, do I have my park subscription, or do I pay the bill, do I pay the rent or mortgage or what have you? So we created that Westerville Helps program to assist our residents to keep them in their homes. And as I mentioned, we took that program even further with the partnership with Morpsey to help with more expensive home repairs. I'm starting to lose my train of thought, sorry, but I've got so many things going on in my head, and I'm trying to be concise. But the opportunity is to listen to what our residents are saying. And many are saying that they want to be able to stay in their homes, particularly our seniors who want to age in their homes, but they're concerned with the rising costs or with the rising property values come the property taxes. And they're fearful that they may be priced out of Westerville. Now, Westerville is considered a progressive and, what's the word we're looking for? A high rent kind of place or what have you. But that's not the word I want to use, but you get what I'm saying. But there are pockets in Westerville of people who are hurting. And I know that. And I've known that through my conversations with residents. And what I want to do is to bring those available resources to our residents where they can tap into a community action agency, where they can tap into a Families Flourish or another organization that they may be unaware of those services that are provided. In May, Westerville held its first ever affordable housing resource fair in partnership with the Columbus Auditor's Office. And it was a very well-attended event. And our residents were appreciative of the fact that we brought to them access to resources that they may not otherwise have known about. So doing those type of things has been a way that we are addressing what's going on right now while planning for how we're going to tackle larger issues as far as more housing units, dealing with the balance between housing development and economic development, and making sure that the residents feel that we're not growing too fast. Because Westerville is known as a city in the park. We've got a lot of beautiful green spaces, and some residents are concerned that we're growing too fast and we're losing that close-knit community feel. And we want to make sure that we're protecting that, but we're also being focused on the future.
Thank you. And I want to ask the question, but you have less time because we're going to try to get back to Dr. Pollack here to tell us the same question regarding Gahanna.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So I wanted to reference Franklin County Commissioner Kevin Boyce issued a white paper at the beginning of this year. It was printed in January of 2024, addressing housing affordability. And in that white paper, he indicates that housing prices surged from 2020 to 2023 by $103,000 on average in our county. And I know I've seen that reflected on my auditor's value and in the house and the sales that are going on in my neighborhood, if not more than that, right? So we need to, and there are a lot of factors that have gone into those increased costs of housing. Some of it is building materials and increased costs on developers to build more projects, and thinking about ways, to Mayor Coleman's point, about helping be very innovative in how we're reducing those costs of new builds, but also thinking about what's been going on with markets that has driven up these costs by square foot. So when you have investors, large national investors buying single-family homes in our most affordable communities, they are depleting the housing stock that would be available to our working families. And I thank Senator Sherrod Brown for tackling this issue. It is a hard issue to tackle, but it is one that we absolutely need to talk about. There are other costs that are going into this, and I appreciate some of the comments that Mayor Wright made about making sure that we're helping to address the costs of homeownership where we can. But we need to address why are investors, why are companies that can profit off of our working class families' homes buying up properties that take that away. So some things that we're working on, that we're exploring in Gahanna, is I would like to make sure that we are being really intentional about short-term rental policy. Short-term rentals are typically, they can be a rental in your own, one of your bedrooms in your own home, but what we're seeing is that that's not necessarily the case. We're seeing that it's the case that it's businesses that are buying up properties that are renting 1 week at a time for much more than I pay for my mortgage. We're also seeing issues related to, investors buying up properties in large numbers across our communities. So I think those are some things that we absolutely need to address. We need to think about how we're talking about them and recognizing all of the factors that are going into driving up the cost of properties.
Thank you. So it's obviously not a quick solution to build more housing, right, or to refurbish the housing that we have. And in the meanwhile, we still have a lot of people who are experiencing health issues based upon where they live. So let's go back to that for a minute, Dr. Pollack, and talk to us about what kind of the primary issues are that you see within families and children that result from living in housing that is substandard. And are there things that we can do in the meanwhile while we try to move this huge rock uphill to solve the overall problem?
Sure, thank you for that question. So it seems like we've been talking a lot about the supply side of housing and trying to build more houses. We know that we've underbuilt since the subprime mortgage crisis, that we don't have enough homes, we don't have enough affordable homes. We also need to think about the demand side of the equation and how do we support families, especially low-income families that need the supports. And so when we talk about housing vouchers as one possibility, housing vouchers and the supports such as Families Flourish and what the types of services that they provide are an important example of what we can do to try to support families in this time when there's just not enough housing, when the wages that people earn are not enough to meet the needs of their household. In terms of thinking about kind of what are ways that we should be thinking about the kind of the health problems that families face, they're really multifaceted. It's one of those fundamental cause problems where it's not just around cancer, it's not just about high blood pressure, it's not just about diabetes. There's evidence that housing affects all of these different conditions for adults and especially for children, especially our youngest children. And so, and I think in the healthcare model of disease, we often think about kind of the high risk, high cost individuals that cost the system a lot of money from a healthcare and I think that is one important way, one important lens to think about this problem, but we also need to think about it through other angles, especially, for example, with children, where we know that children don't necessarily cost the healthcare system very much money early on in the short term because thankfully they tend to be pretty healthy, but over the long term, when we think about the compounding effects of the investments that we're making right now, that's where I think we can see some real play and traction around it.
Great, thank you. Well, as you all know, it's time, right? We always encourage audience questions at CMC. So we'll move to questions from our live stream and our audience. And if you're here in the building, back to the microphone in the back. We're going to go one kind of quick lightning round here of a question we're going to ask our panelists while you all assemble yourselves, and then we'll get moving on our questions. So for each of you, quickly, the stakes are high, right? There's a lot going on, and we really need to address this housing shortage. We have an immense amount of development happening in our city. We're looking to bring lots more people here. I think the statistic that I read this week is another 1 million people by 2050. So big effort. If there's just one thing that you would do or could do right now, or that you're working on doing right now that you think is
15. Thank you. It has reduced by exponentially, and it has absolutely, you want to look at what is defunding police, it is the degradation of the local government fund. You want to talk about what puts strain on local economies and to be able to do these progressive things, to build more infrastructure, to support affordable housing projects. It is defunding of the local government fund. So that's number one. I think number two, to Mayor Coleman's point, we absolutely need to build bridges, not just within Franklin County, but with our neighbors to the east. They are as much a part of this dialogue as we are, and we need to look at how regionally, and thankfully with MORPC's support, we're looking at how to create those corridors and build additional infrastructure. It does need to be a regional solution to this problem.
Great, thank you. Would you like to weigh in?
I think I'll defer.
You're going to defer. We're going to go to questions in the back. I think, Doug, you're ready.
Darci, thank you very much, and thank you to today's panelists. Please do join us, although we're running short on time. We'll try to keep each question and answer to about 2 minutes or so. Great questions at CMC always have two things in common. They take less than 30 seconds to ask, and what punctuation mark do they end in? A question mark. Yes, thank you, everybody. Bill Lafayette, watching on the live stream audience, asks, how can civic and neighborhood leaders overcome NIMBY fears? NIMBY is not in my backyard. How can they overcome NIMBY fears among residents?
Well, I don't know if you can stop it. What it takes is the political courage of those in power to say this is the direction we're going. And over time, the NIMBYs will be yes-bees or whatever you call them. It takes political courage to stand up to NIMBYism, saying it's not acceptable. It's almost like racism. You got to stand up to it. Say it's not acceptable in this community. And if you want to offer constructive ideas on how to get things done, other than I don't want those people living next door to me, that is welcome. But it takes courage and political stand-upness. We're going this direction, and you need to follow.
That a little bit. So I also wanted to add that having meaningful conversations with people who may have an initial opposition to a project is really critical. These are our neighbors, these are they go to school with our kids, and being able to identify what their real fears are. Are their fears, their fears are about loss of something, right? It's loss of quality of schools or loss of value of their own property. Identifying that and being able to combat that with facts when they're open to it, and explaining to them that their regional leaders are prepared for the growth. I have found that to be an effective way to address some of those concerns.
Right. We go to the question in the back.
Right. Hi, Joel Jones here in support of the awesome organization Family Flourish. Question, in a capitalistic society, is it logical to expect equity in housing? And if so, what is the role of government in holding corporations responsible in a capitalistic society to deliver affordable housing? And I'm talking specifically to developers about development.
That's a fantastic question, and thank you so much for asking that. You know, one of the, again, leaning into these hard conversations and making sure that they understand that their investment in our community invests in their future workforce. Making sure that they understand that by asking for abatements of 80 or 100%, that they are harming our school districts by doing that, and that we need to have honest conversations about how those tax dollars that are generated, those jobs that are important to bring to our community, are also supporting the holistic health and well-being of our community through our schools and the access to services that local government can provide.
I also want to add to that to say that we have an enormous tax incentive for homeowners through the mortgage interest deduction, right? And so when we're thinking about housing policy, we really need to think about it holistically. And I'm not arguing that we should do away with that deduction in any sense, but what I'm saying is that we already subsidize homeowners to a tremendous extent, and thinking about what is fair to lower income renters in order to make sure that their needs are met as well.
Hi, Hi. Oh, can you hear me? Okay. My name is Carolyn Fowler, and I have a question. I think something that's really interesting about Columbus is that despite the fact that we are a mid-sized city, Columbus has some of the highest eviction rates of the country. In 2016, Columbus had more eviction decisions by number than the entire city of Chicago. And so I would love to hear what the panel thinks on how Columbus should address such high eviction rates.
Well, I guess, let me think about that. Let me try to answer it the best I can. And I need a little help from the current.
I can share a little bit about what we've done. A little bit about what we've done in Gahanna, and I again want to shout out to our colleagues on Columbus City Council who have also leaned into this conversation. We have adopted a comprehensive fair housing code that includes source of income protection and a codified pay to stay to help address some of these concerns. So those are some things at a local policy level to that point to help address the high eviction rates in the county.
Hello? Okay. If I could add to that, I referenced the housing study that we did, and that identified that there are significant numbers of Westerville residents who are cost burdened, meaning they are spending more than 30% of their income on housing costs. And there are residents who are severely cost burdened. That was the impetus for us creating the Westerville Helps program. It was the impetus behind the housing pilot program, helping residents who are financially challenged be able to pay their main housing expenses and not have to worry about additional costs. So where we're able to help out, that's what we're doing as a way to address those shortfalls that they may have with their housing expenses.
I would say from a health perspective, we've been doing some work in a study that's going to come out very soon, led by Kate Leifheit at UCLA, that has been taking advantage of the fact that New York rolled out their Right to Counsel program in a piecemeal zip code by zip code fashion, showing that those zip codes that got Right to Counsel had better birth outcomes for the families living there. And so I think Right to Counsel, if it hasn't been explored yet, is one possibility of trying to help renters avoid eviction and with potential spillover effects on health.
Our city attorney is taking notes. I'm sorry.
We have just a couple of minutes left. We'll try to get to at least 2 more questions.
My name's Howard Levitt, I'm with Families Flourish. Quick question, we keep talking about increasing housing, but I'm curious, how do we address the 3 forces against that? Prior to 2000, before the banking collapse, we were building 2 million homes a year in this country. We're down to less than 600,000. Then the second issue is that you talked about increasing, like in Westerville and Gahanna, other housing, but the local power, people don't want to expand that because they're worried about it's affecting their income. And if Gahanna is a nice place to move to and we keep the cost down, more people move to Gahanna, which increases the cost of the houses. So we have these 3 different forces that affect housing. How do we address that? In 30 seconds or less, sorry.
Well, in Westerville, we're looking at a lot of mixed-use opportunities where we've got retail businesses on the first floor and then dwelling units on the higher levels. We're also looking at our density bonus areas where we can have multifamily housing that's not going to be too much different than the established communities, because that's what some of our residents are concerned about, is that multifamily units might change the character or the makeup of their neighborhood. So there are places in Westerville where we can build up, not necessarily build out, because we are landlocked, and we are being thoughtful about those type of developments.
Hello, thank you all for the great conversation. I'm Michelle Missler with the American Association of Service Coordinators, and I'm just curious, what we know about the intersectionality between health and housing is that there's great resources. You guys have told about great programs that we're seeing in different communities for the residents in the housing. But what I'm curious about is how do folks connect to those? So within the service coordinator field through HUD Affordable Housing, what we know is service coordinators are essential to connecting those residents to the resources within a community to help maintain their housing and help improve their health. So I'm just curious how you all see the importance of services within the housing or connecting to services within the community.
What was the question?
Sorry. How do you see how do you envision the future of services within housing, and how do we create that within our community?
Well,
The dots.
yeah, so it's a good question, and I can have Amy Claiborne stand up right here. Stand up, Amy. She's with Families Flourish. And I've become a champion of Families Flourish because what they do is connect the dots. They're not dealing with the housing issue by itself. Provide a, I don't know, $500 whatever dollars of subsidy, that's a good thing. Helps put those in gated communities they were been excluded from. And I will tell you, some of those gated communities are not in the suburban areas. This is right here within the boundaries of the city of Columbus. There are certain parts of the city that I know families that say, I could never live there. Yet you only live 3 blocks across a certain street. The apartments become, 3 times more expensive. The property values are substantially higher. Connecting the dots, having a more holistic approach to housing is, I think, the future of America. I know that in the, hopefully the new administration in Washington, and you know what I'm talking about, I'm wearing blue today, in celebration of that in advance. I'm confident they're going to start talking about how do you connect the dots. That it's not just a housing issue. We got to deal with the health issue. We have to deal with the education issue and some other safety issues. And how do you create that holistic approach to shelter and to housing? And I think that's, frankly, the answer.
This is a fantastic conversation, and hopefully we can continue in future forums to talk about more. But I'm getting the signal back there from Doug that we got to wrap it up. So we're going to let everybody move on with their day, and I'm going to turn the podium back over to Tony.
Okay, so I have to apologize for my low energy on the way up here at the beginning of this, because this topic is really heavy. But you know what? I got some groove with me, and I kept hearing in my head the Beatles song, Come Together, right? Come together. That's what I was hearing. So I hope you found today's community conversation hopeful that we will become qualified on the subject to thoughtfully and strategically open the gates. Because why? We are better together. And yes, we are better together because we what? Come together. Right now. Don't hire me for my singing, hire me for my personality. All right. Thank you so much to today's forum sponsors, the Robert Weiler Company. Thanks to the Thanks Be to God Foundation, and today's forum partners, Families Flourish, and the Ellis. We are also grateful to presenting sponsor of our live stream, the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation, and our live stream partner as well, the Columbus Dispatch. And a very, very special appreciation to today's speakers. Since I'm referencing, parties and singers, let's throw our hands in the air and wave them like we don't care for Craig Pollack. Merisa Bowers, Mayor Michael B. Coleman, Mayor Kenneth Wright, and our fantastic host, Darci Grove, Managing Director with GBQ. I swear, I wish we had more time. We can keep, if you want to have an after party, we can keep this conversation going, but I think the Ellis wants us out of here at a reasonable time. So please also note that the next 3 forums will be at our alternative location because of the Italian Festival. So we will be at View Columbus, which is a beautiful space as well, including next Wednesday's forum. Are you ready for next Wednesday's forum title? Yes, you are. Drum roll, please. Outdated funding, lost lives, why Ohio's babies and birthing parents deserve better. Because why? We're better together. Because we have to what? One more time, a little louder. Thank you very much. So please register and secure your spot. Thank you. We could not do this without you.